For Julian Croft, a man who built a global tech empire on cold, hard data, the truth was the only currency he trusted. He lived in a world of absolutes of binary code and predictable outcomes, but the one truth he thought was sacred, the lineage of his infant son Leo, was about to unravel not just his multi-million-dollar marriage, but the very fabric of his reality. He filed for divorce, armed with the certainty of a CEO and a non-negotiable demand for a DNA test. The results would indeed come, but they wouldn't expose an unfaithful wife. They would expose a secret so profound, a truth so medically impossible, it would force him and his wife to question everything they ever knew about love biology and the child they both adored. The penthouse overlooked Central Park, a sprawling kingdom of green and grey laid out 70 floors below. From this vantage point, the city's relentless symphony, the distant wail of a siren, the perpetual hum of traffic, was muted to a respectful whisper. This was Julian Croft's world, a fortress of steel, glass, and silence that he had meticulously built for himself. At 42, Julian possessed the kind of restless energy that had allowed him to forge a billion-dollar software company, Croft Core, from a garage in Silicon Valley 2 decades ago. He was a man who understood systems, who saw life as a series of algorithms. You input the right data, you get the desired result. His wife, Isabella Rossi, was supposed to be his most perfect acquisition. They met at a gallery in Soho, where she was a curator. She was everything his life of code and boardrooms was not: warm, effusive, with a laugh that seemed to fill the sterile emptiness of his minimalist apartment. She spoke of art with a passion he usually reserved for quarterly earnings reports. Julian, a man who had everything, found himself wanting the one thing he couldn't quantify: her light. Their romance was a whirlwind, a publicist's dream. The stoic tech mogul swept off his feet by the fiery Italian-American art expert. Their wedding was an opulent affair at a villa on Lake Como, a carefully curated event that felt more like a merger than a marriage. For 2 years, their life was a glossy magazine spread, and then came their greatest project, a child. It hadn't been easy. The path to parenthood was a brutal clinical gauntlet of appointments, injections, and soul-crushing disappointments. They had turned to the most exclusive fertility clinic in New York City, the Genesis Center, a place that promised miracles for a price. After 3 grueling rounds of in vitro fertilization, their miracle arrived. Leo was 6 months old now, a gurgling, beautiful baby with wide, curious eyes and a tuft of downy brown hair. Isabella was a natural mother. She had given up her career without a second thought, her world shrinking to the dimensions of the nursery, and she had never seemed happier. Her love for Leo was a fierce, all-consuming force that Julian watched with a mixture of admiration and a strange, unsettling detachment. The detachment had started subtly. It was a quiet hum of discord beneath the surface of their perfect life. It began with a stray comment. "It's strange," Julian had said one evening, scrolling through old family photos on a tablet while Isabella rocked Leo to sleep. "My baby pictures. I had this shock of blonde hair, stick straight, and blue eyes, bluer than the Caribbean." Isabella had smiled, her eyes still fixed on their son. "Genetics are a lottery, darling. He has my brown eyes, my hair. Maybe he'll get your business sense, and we'll have the perfect combination." But for Julian, it wasn't a lottery. It was a data point that didn't compute. He started observing Leo with an unnerving intensity. He'd study the curve of the baby's ears, the shape of his nose, the tiny whorls of his fingerprints. He downloaded genetic inheritance charts, cross-referencing his own dominant and recessive traits with Isabella's. His best friend and Croft Corps' COO, Marcus Thorne, noticed the change during one of their weekly squash games. Julian's usual ruthless precision on the court was gone, replaced by a distracted, simmering frustration. "Everything all right, Jules?" Marcus asked, as they toweled off. "You seem a million miles away." Julian slammed his racket into his gym bag. "It's nothing. Doesn't look like nothing." "Trouble in paradise?" Julian hesitated the words, tasting like poison on his tongue. "Do you think Leo looks like me?" Marcus was taken aback. "What, he's a baby?" "He looks like a baby. He's got Isabella's coloring, maybe. Who cares? He's a great kid. Everyone says that. He has Isabella's coloring. No one ever says he looks like me. Not one person," Julian said, his voice low and tight. The algorithm in his head was malfunctioning. The inputs were his DNA, his wife's DNA. The output should be a child bearing a recognizable trace of him. But the output this beautiful baby boy felt. Alien. The doubt began as a whisper in the back of his mind, a single line of corrupted code. But in the sterile silence of his glass fortress, the whisper was starting to sound like a scream. He started coming home later, retreating to his study, the one room in the penthouse that Isabella rarely entered. It was his sanctuary of logic, filled with monitors displaying fluctuating market data. Here the world made sense. But outside that door, in the warmth of the home Isabella had created, lay a profound and terrifying uncertainty. One night, Isabella found him staring into Leo's crib long after the baby had fallen asleep. There was no fatherly adoration on his face, only a cold, analytical scrutiny. "Julian, what are you doing?" she asked softly from the doorway. He flinched, startled. "Nothing. Just watching him." "You've been so distant lately," she said, her voice laced with a hurt she could no longer hide. "Is it work?" He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Isabella, when we were at the clinic, the IVF process, it's all very clinical, isn't it? A lot of moving parts, a lot of people involved." Isabella frowned, confused. "Yes. Nurses, doctors, embryologists. What about it?" "There's a margin for error in any system," he continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "Human error. It's unavoidable." A cold dread began to seep into Isabella's bones. This wasn't about work. This was about something far more fundamental. "What are you trying to say, Julian?" He looked from her to the sleeping child in the crib, and his gaze was filled with a chilling suspicion. "I'm saying I need certainty. I need to know the truth." Isabella felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The man she loved, the man whose child she had carried and birthed, was looking at her as if she were a stranger, a variable in an equation that wasn't adding up. The gilded cage had never felt so cold. The demand, when it finally came, was not delivered in a moment of heated passion. It was presented with the cold, dispassionate finality of a business proposal. They were in the living room, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of fallen stars. Leo was asleep in his nursery, blissfully unaware of the fault line that was about to rupture his world. Julian slid a folder across the polished marble coffee table. Isabella stared at it, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't a legal document, not yet. It was a brochure for a DNA diagnostics lab. "I've made an appointment for next Tuesday," Julian stated. Not asked. It's a simple cheek swab. For you, me, and Leo. We'll have the results in 48 hours. Then we can put this to rest. Isabella felt a wave of nausea. The sheer calculated audacity of it stole her breath. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not her husband, but a stranger, a paranoid, obsessive man she didn't recognize. Put this to rest. She repeated, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. You think a test is going to fix what you've already broken? You are questioning my fidelity, Julian. You are questioning the very foundation of our marriage, our family. You are questioning me. I'm questioning a data anomaly, he retorted, his voice clipped and precise. The child does not resemble me. It's a logical inconsistency that needs to be resolved. He is not a data anomaly. He is our son, she cried, jumping to her feet. He is the son I carried for 9 months. The son I went through hell and back for with needles and hormones and heartbreak. How dare you reduce all of that to a logical inconsistency? The IVF process is exactly my point. He countered, his own voice rising, the cool veneer cracking. It's a black box, Isabella. We hand over our biological material, and we trust a team of strangers to handle it correctly. You have no idea what happens behind those lab doors. I'm a systems analyst. I know that any system can be compromised. His words were a special kind of cruelty. He wasn't just accusing her of infidelity. He was devaluing the very experience of pregnancy and childbirth that had defined the last year of her life, framing it as a potentially flawed manufacturing process. So this isn't just about me cheating, she said, a bitter realization dawning. This is about some insane conspiracy theory where the most respected fertility clinic in the country somehow. What swapped your sample is that it... I'm not proposing a theory. I'm seeking data to form a conclusion, he said stubbornly. If the test proves he's my son, I will be the first to admit I was wrong. I will apologize, and we will move on. Move on. She let out a hollow laugh. There is no moving on from this, Julian. You don't get to light a fire to our home and then apologize for the ashes. The trust is gone. What you are suggesting is unforgivable. She refused. Absolutely, unequivocally refused. It was a matter of principle. Submitting to the test felt like an admission of guilt, a validation of his disgusting suspicion. Her refusal only cemented his belief that she was hiding something. The penthouse became a battlefield of Arctic silences and whispered venomous arguments behind closed doors. Isabella threw herself into caring for Leo with a desperate ferocity, as if her love could form a shield around him. Julian, in turn, retreated further into his work, his interactions with his son becoming strained and rare. He saw the bond between Isabella and Leo, a seamless, innate connection, and in his paranoid state, he interpreted it as a conspiracy of 2 against 1. He felt like an outsider in his own home. 2 weeks after his initial demand, Julian made his final move. Isabella was feeding Leo in the sun-drenched breakfast nook when the doorbell chimed. Their housekeeper, Maria, answered it. A moment later, a man in a crisp suit stood in the archway, a leather satchel in his hand. Isabella Croft, he asked, his tone professionally neutral. Yes. He stepped forward and handed her a thick manila envelope. You've been served. Isabella's blood ran cold. She didn't need to open it. She knew. Her hands trembled as she tore the seal. The words leaped off the page, stark and brutal in their legalese. Petition for dissolution of marriage. She scanned the text, her vision blurring with tears, And then she saw the grounds, the reason cited for the divorce, and a choked sob escaped her lips. Irreconcilable differences arising from the petitioner's discovery of fraud pertaining to the paternity of the child Leo Croft. Fraud. He had called her a fraud. He had called their son a fraud. It was a declaration of war. He hadn't just filed for divorce. He had publicly, legally branded her an adulteress and their child illegitimate. The document also contained a motion to compel a DNA test, a financial restraining order, freezing their joint assets, and a demand for sole custody of Leo once paternity was clarified. He had built a fortress of glass and steel around her, and now he was systematically demolishing it, leaving her with nothing but the rubble. She looked from the papers in her hand to the innocent baby in his high chair, babbling and smearing sweet potato on his face. He was the only thing that mattered. Her first call was not to a friend or her family, but to the fiercest divorce attorney she had ever heard of, a woman named Eleanor Vance. As she explained the situation, her voice breaking, she realized Julian had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He thought his logic and his wealth made him invincible. He had pushed her into a corner, but he had forgotten one thing about Isabella Rossi. She was a mother, and he had just threatened her child. The unraveling was complete. Now the fight would begin. Eleanor Vance's office was the antithesis of Julian's world. It was located in a historic brownstone in the West Village, filled with overflowing bookshelves, antique furniture, and the scent of old paper and Earl Grey tea. Eleanor herself was in her late 50s, with a sharp, intelligent gaze that missed nothing, and a reputation for being a formidable strategist, with a surprising well of empathy. Isabella sat across from her, the divorce papers laid out between them, like a formal surrender. She had recounted the entire story, from the first unsettling comment to the brutal arrival of the process server. Eleanor listened patiently, her fingers steepled. When Isabella finished, her voice raw, the lawyer leaned forward. "He's a bully, Mrs. Croft. A very wealthy, very intelligent bully. And bullies, no matter how sophisticated, operate on one principle: intimidation. This document," she said, tapping the petition, "is designed to make you panic, to make you feel powerless, and to force you to capitulate to his demand for the paternity test." "I won't do it," Isabella said, the defiance returning to her voice. "It's a violation. I understand that." "Emotionally, it's a profound betrayal," Eleanor said calmly. "But legally and strategically, your refusal is hurting you. In family court, a refusal to take a paternity test when paternity is in question is often viewed as an indication that you have something to hide. His lawyers will paint you as deceptive. It gives him leverage. So I have to let him win?" Isabella asked, her heart sinking. "No, we are not going to let him win. We are going to take his weapon and turn it against him," Eleanor said, a glint in her eye. "We will agree to the test." Isabella stared at her. "But—" "On our terms," Eleanor continued, cutting her off. "We will file a response. We will agree to the DNA test contingent on it being performed by a neutral court-appointed lab, with representatives from both legal teams present to witness the sample collection. We will state for the record that you are doing this under duress to protect your child from the cloud of illegitimacy your husband has created. We will frame this not as you surrendering, but as a mother taking the necessary steps to clear her name and secure her child's future. We will make him look like the paranoid, controlling aggressor." For the first time in weeks, Isabella felt a flicker of hope. Eleanor's strategy was brilliant. It shifted the narrative. She wasn't a cornered wife anymore. She was a proactive mother fighting back. The next week, was a blur of legal maneuvering. Eleanor's response was filed, and as predicted, Julian's high-powered legal team at Sterling, Lynch and Associates was momentarily thrown off balance. Their lead attorney, a notoriously aggressive litigator named Robert Sterling, had expected a protracted fight over the test itself. By agreeing, Isabella had neutralized his primary line of attack. A court date was set not for a hearing, but for the sample collection itself. It was to take place in a sterile conference room at a neutral mediation center. The days leading up to it were the longest of Isabella's life. She and Julian continued to live in the penthouse, their home now carved into hostile territories. They communicated only through clipped, formal text messages, mostly regarding Leo's schedule. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Every time Isabella looked at Leo, a wave of protectiveness washed over her, so fierce it was painful. This test was a formality to her. She knew she had been faithful. She knew Leo was Julian's son. She had carried him, felt his every kick, and stared into his eyes every day for 6 months. There was no doubt in her soul. The pain came from Julian's willingness to believe a phantom suspicion over the woman he had vowed to love and trust. The night before the test, Isabella couldn't sleep. She walked into the nursery and stood over Leo's crib, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. The moonlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the room. Her son. In less than 24 hours, a piece of paper would officially confirm what her heart had known all along. And then the real battle would begin, deciding if a marriage so thoroughly poisoned by doubt could ever be saved. As she stood there, a memory surfaced. A small, insignificant detail from their time at the Genesis Center. It was the day of the embryo transfer, the most hopeful and nerve-wracking day of the entire IVF process. They had been in a private recovery room when a nurse had come in to check on her. The nurse was older, with tired eyes and a slightly harried demeanor. She had been complaining under her breath about being short-staffed, about a new computer system that was causing chaos with the labeling protocols. Everything is double-triple checked. Of course, the nurse whose name tag read Brenda had reassured them with a thin smile. But this new software, it's a headache, thinks it's smarter than we are. At the time, Isabella had dismissed it as the casual grumbling of an overworked employee. But now, in the chilling context of Julian's accusations, the memory felt different. It was a tiny crack in the pristine facade of the infallible clinic. Human error. Any system can be compromised. Julian's words echoed in her mind. She shook her head, trying to banish the thought. It was ridiculous. A clinic of that caliber wouldn't make a mistake of that magnitude. Her mind was just grasping at straws infected by Julian's paranoia. This was about infidelity. That was the accusation on the table. Nothing else. The next day she dressed with deliberate care, choosing a simple, elegant navy blue dress. She was not a victim. She was Isabella Rossi, and she was going to reclaim her life. With Eleanor by her side, she walked into the mediation center, her head held high. Julian was already there with Robert Sterling. He looked tired, the strain of the last few weeks etched on his face. He wouldn't meet her eyes. A court-appointed administrator and a technician from the lab were present. The room was cold, clinical, and silent. The process was quick and deeply humiliating. The technician took a swab from inside Julian's cheek, then from hers. Finally, Eleanor held Leo in her arms while the technician gently swabbed the inside of the baby's mouth. Leo, startled, began to cry. The sound echoed in the tense silence of the room, a pure, innocent protest against the cold adult world that was failing him. The samples were sealed, labeled, and placed into a locked case. The results will be delivered concurrently to both legal counsels in 72 hours, the administrator announced. 3 days. In 3 days, the war would be over. Or so Isabella thought. She had no idea that the verdict she was waiting for would not be the end of the war, but the beginning of an entirely new and far more terrifying one. The truth was coming, but it was a truth that no one in that room could have ever conceived. The 72 hours felt like a lifetime suspended in amber. Isabella stayed with her sister Chloe, unable to bear the oppressive silence of the penthouse. Chloe's small, cluttered apartment in Brooklyn was a world away from the sterile luxury Isabella had grown accustomed to. It was filled with life chaos and unwavering support. "He's a monster," Bella Chloe said for the 100th time, bouncing a fussy Leo on her hip. "When this is over, you take that baby. You take half of everything that monster owns and you build a new life." Isabella wished it were that simple. Despite the anger and the betrayal, a part of her still mourned the man she had married, the life they were supposed to have. On the 3rd day, the call came. It was Eleanor Vance. Her voice was steady, but Isabella detected an unusual, unreadable tone beneath the professional calm. "The results are in, Isabella. They've been emailed to my office and to Mr. Sterling's. Can you and Chloe come in? I think it's best we review this together." The request for Chloe to be present sent a jolt of anxiety through Isabella. "Is everything okay? Just come to the office, Isabella. We'll talk here." The taxi ride to the West Village was a blur. Isabella held Leo tightly, his warmth a small comfort against the chilling dread that was creeping back in. In Eleanor's office, the air was thick with anticipation. Eleanor sat behind her desk, a single printed document placed face down in front of her. "Please sit," she said gently. Isabella and Chloe sat Leo, now sleeping peacefully in his carrier, at their feet. Eleanor took a deep breath. "As you know, the lab tested 2 things. First, the probability of paternity between Julian Croft and Leo. Second, as a control, the probability of maternity between you and Leo." She paused, her eyes meeting Isabella's. The results for Julian came back first. She flipped the paper over. Isabella's eyes darted to the bottom line, the bolded text. "Probability of paternity set." The number was stark, absolute, a 0. Isabella stared at it, her mind refusing to process the information. It was impossible. A mistake. "No," she whispered. "That's wrong. The lab made a mistake. That's impossible." Isabella Eleanor said, her voice soft but firm. "The legal standard for exclusion is 0%. Julian Croft is not Leo's biological father." Chloe gasped, reaching out to grab her sister's hand. "Bella." Isabella's world tilted on its axis. A torrent of emotions crashed over her: confusion, terror, a profound sense of violation. She hadn't cheated. She knew this with a certainty that was as real as her own heartbeat. So how could this be? Her mind raced, grasping for an explanation. The clinic, a mix-up. Julian's words came screaming back to her. A system can be compromised, but before she could even voice this chaotic thought, Eleanor spoke again. Her voice graver than before. "Isabella, there's something else. This is unprecedented in my career. I've never seen anything like this." She slid the paper across the desk. Isabella's gaze moved past the paternity section to the lines below it, the part she had assumed was a mere formality. Maternal analysis. Isabella Rossi. Genetic markers compared to child. Leo result. The alleged mother, Isabella Rossi, is excluded as the biological mother of the child Leo. Probability of maternity, 0%. 0%. The words didn't register at first. They were just letters on a page, a sequence of characters that made no sense. Maternity, 0%. Excluded as the biological mother. It was as if the air had been sucked from the room. Isabella's hearing faded to a dull roar. The patterns on Eleanor's antique rug swam before her eyes. The baby she carried inside her for 39 weeks. The baby she felt kick and hiccup. The baby whose birth was a searing, triumphant memory. The baby currently sleeping at her feet, whose scent she knew better than her own. He wasn't hers. A guttural sound escaped her throat, a sound of pure, primal agony. It wasn't a cry of sadness, but of a soul being ripped in two. No. No. That's a lie. That is a lie. She screamed, lunging forward as if to tear the paper to shreds. Chloe caught her, holding her tight as Isabella began to sob, her body shaking uncontrollably. This is a mistake, a horrible mistake. I'm his mother. I am his mother. Eleanor Vance, for the first time in her unflappable career, looked utterly shaken. She rounded the desk, kneeling beside her client. Isabella, breathe. Just breathe. We are going to figure this out. At that exact moment across town, in a steel and glass conference room, Julian Croft and Robert Sterling were staring at an identical document. Julian had expected vindication. He had expected the 0% paternity result. He had steeled himself for the anger, the confrontation, the ugly but necessary end to his marriage. He was not prepared for the second 0. He read the line about the maternity results once then, twice then, a third time. The logic in his brain, the system on which his entire life was built, crashed. It was a fatal error from which there was no recovery. Fraud. He had accused her of fraud. He had imagined a simple, sordid affair. But this was something else entirely. This wasn't a betrayal. It was a cosmic impossibility. The baby he had rejected, the child he had refused to bond with because he didn't see himself in his eyes, wasn't biologically his. But he also wasn't Isabella's. The woman he had called a liar and a cheat was a victim of something far more sinister than he could have ever imagined. He looked at the hard, triumphant face of his lawyer, who was already strategizing his next move. "This is incredible," Sterling was saying. "This changes everything. We can annul the marriage claim. She was never the mother. This is a clean—" "Shut up," Julian said, his voice quiet but laced with a new, terrifying emotion. Dread. "Just shut up." He stood up and walked to the window, staring down at the city below. For the first time, his fortress felt like a prison. He had wanted the truth. He had waged a war for a single piece of data. And now he had it. The truth wasn't a weapon that had won him the war. It was a bomb that had detonated in the center of all their lives, vaporizing everything: their anger, their accusations, their entire reality. He and Isabella were no longer husband and wife, locked in a bitter divorce. They were two strangers bound together by a shared nightmare, and by the love they both felt for a child who, according to science, belonged to neither of them. The divorce proceedings didn't just halt. They evaporated. The petition, the motions, the accusations of fraud, they all became meaningless artifacts of a reality that no longer existed. Robert Sterling, sensing the seismic shift, attempted to call Julian, but his calls went to voicemail. Julian Croft had gone silent. The first communication came not from lawyer to lawyer, but from man to woman. A simple text message from Julian to Isabella, sent late the night of the reveal. "I am so sorry, Isabella. I was wrong. About everything. Please just tell me you and Leo are safe." Isabella, huddled in her sister's guest room and staring at her sleeping baby, read the message through a haze of tears. The apology felt distant, hollow. Sorry couldn't stitch back the reality that had been torn apart. She didn't reply. The following morning, Eleanor Vance went on the offensive. This was no longer a divorce case. It was a potential criminal investigation and a massive medical malpractice lawsuit. She assembled a team, a private investigator, a medical law specialist, and a press relations expert to manage the inevitable media storm. Their target was singular, the Genesis Center. "They will try to bury this," Eleanor explained to Isabella and Chloe in her office, which had become their war room. "They'll offer a settlement demand, a non-disclosure agreement, and try to make this go away quietly. We will not let them. There is another family out there, Isabella. A family that has your biological child. And you have theirs. We have to find them." The thought was a new, fresh wave of agony. Somewhere in the world, another woman was raising her baby. Her biological son or daughter. Did they look like Julian? Did they have his blonde hair and blue eyes? And the Garcias, the hypothetical other family, were they searching too? Or were they blissfully unaware, loving the child that was biologically Isabella's? The complexity of it was a crushing weight. The investigation began with a formal records request citing the DNA evidence. The Genesis Center's initial response was a wall of corporate legalese and denial. They claimed their protocols were infallible. But behind the scenes, panic was setting in. The PI, a former NYPD detective named Frank Russo, began the painstaking work of backgrounding the clinic's employees. He focused on the staff who were on duty on the day of Isabella's embryo transfer, and one name quickly rose to the top of the list: Brenda, the senior embryologist. The same nurse whose comments about the faulty software had stuck in Isabella's memory. Russo's digging uncovered that Brenda had been passed over for a promotion 2 months before the Crofts' procedure. He also found something more compelling. Her daughter had been on a waiting list for donor embryos at a low-cost clinic for years, her infertility a source of deep family pain. Brenda was a woman surrounded by the daily miracles she provided for the wealthy while her own family suffered. It was a powerful, potentially dangerous emotional cocktail. While the investigation unfolded, Julian reappeared. He didn't come to the penthouse. He came to Chloe's apartment in Brooklyn. When Isabella opened the door, she saw a man utterly changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a haunted, desperate look. "Isabella," he said, his voice hoarse. "I know I have no right. But can I see him?" She wanted to slam the door in his face. She wanted to scream at him for what he had done. But looking at his broken expression, she saw not the monster who had served her divorce papers, but a man as lost and terrified as she was. And she knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that Julian's connection to Leo wasn't severed by that DNA report. He was Leo's father in every way that mattered, except for the one he had prized most. She stepped aside and let him in. He walked slowly towards the playpen, where Leo was sitting, babbling at a set of colorful rings. Julian knelt down, his expensive suit looking out of place on Chloe's worn hardwood floor. He didn't touch the baby, just looked at him. For the first time, His gaze held no suspicion, no cold analysis. It held only regret and a profound, aching love. "His name is Leo Julian," said quietly, as if introducing himself. "Your name is Leo." From that day on, an uneasy truce formed. Julian didn't try to reclaim his home or his wife. He used his immense resources to aid the investigation. He hired his own team of forensic accountants to tear through the Genesis Center's financials, looking for any sign of a cover-up. He and Isabella were no longer fighting each other. They were fighting a common enemy, a shared, impossible truth. The breakthrough came a week later. Under the immense pressure of the impending lawsuit, a junior lab technician at the Genesis Center broke. She confessed to Frank Russo that she had seen Brenda acting strangely on the day of the Crofts' transfer. She had seen her stay late, working near the cryogenic storage tanks, long after her shift had ended, muttering about balancing the scales. Armed with this testimony, Eleanor and Russo confronted Brenda at her home in Queens. At first, she denied everything. But as Eleanor laid out the evidence, the timeline, the witness statement, the devastating DNA report, the older woman crumbled. Sobbing at her kitchen table, Brenda told them everything. It wasn't about a software glitch or a random mistake. It was deliberate. On that day, 2 sets of embryos were being prepared for transfer. The Crofts' A-grade, genetically perfect specimens from a wealthy, powerful couple, and the Garcias' another couple who had been trying for years their last viable embryo only, a B-grade. Brenda knew the Garcias. They weren't famous or rich. They were a school teacher and a fireman from Staten Island. In a moment of what she described as misguided, maddening pity, she had made a decision. She had looked at the 2 petri dishes side by side. The Crofts had everything, she reasoned. They could try again and again. The Garcias. This was their last shot. I didn't think of it as stealing. She wept, her face buried in her hands. I thought of it as a gift. I was giving their baby a better chance, a stronger embryo. I thought I was helping God. She had swapped them. With a steady hand, she had taken the petri dish labeled Croft and placed it on the tray destined for Mrs. Garcia. And the one labeled Garcia went to Isabella. She had falsified the logs, relying on the chaos of the new computer system to cover her tracks. She never thought anyone would find out. Who would ever think to run a maternal DNA test on a mother who had given birth? Isabella listened to the relayed confession in stunned silence. Her son, the child she had nourished and loved, was named Mateo Garcia. And her biological child, a boy, was being raised by a fireman and a school teacher in Staten Island. He was named Daniel. The hunt for the truth was over. But a new, even more agonizing journey was about to begin. How do you untangle 2 families, 2 lives, 2 sons bound together by a secret swap in a sterile lab? The meeting was arranged on neutral ground, Eleanor Vance's office. It was the most difficult, heart-wrenching meeting any of them would ever attend. Julian and Isabella arrived first, a united but fragile front. They had spent days in a state of shock, barely speaking, simply coexisting in their shared grief and confusion. Then Mariah and David Garcia arrived. They were a handsome couple in their late 30s with the kind of open, honest faces that immediately put one at ease. Maria was a kindergarten teacher with warm, expressive eyes, and David was a tall, solidly built fireman whose hands, though large, looked gentle. They radiated a nervous but palpable decency, and in Maria's arms, wrapped in a blue blanket, was a baby boy with a shock of blonde hair and eyes as blue as the Caribbean Sea. He was the spitting image of Julian's baby pictures. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. Her biological son. Her Daniel. David Garcia, in turn, was holding a baby carrier. In it slept Mateo, the baby Isabella knew as Leo, with his dark hair and olive skin. He looked just like Maria. For a long moment, no one spoke. The two families stood on opposite sides of the room, separated by an invisible chasm of impossibility. The two babies, oblivious, were the bridges between them. Maria Garcia was the first to break the silence, her voice thick with emotion as she looked at Isabella. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "We had no idea. He is so loved." Tears streamed down Isabella's face. I know she managed to say, her gaze fixed on the blonde baby in Maria's arms. "Our son, he is loved too." There were no easy answers. The lawyers could speak of legal rights and biological claims. But in that room, the four parents faced a reality that transcended law. They had each spent 6 months falling deeply and irrevocably in love with a child that was not by blood their own. To simply swap back felt like a brutal amputation of the soul. How could Isabella hand over the baby she had nursed and rocked to sleep every night? How could Maria give away the child whose every cry and coo she knew intimately? Over several more excruciatingly emotional meetings, a plan began to form. It was unconventional, messy, and without precedent, but it was forged from love. They would not swap the children. The bonds they had formed were too sacred to break. But they could not live in denial of the biology either. They decided to become a new kind of family. They sold their respective homes. Julian, in an act of profound atonement, bought a large duplex property in a quiet, family-friendly neighborhood in Park Slope, Brooklyn. The Garcias would live on one floor, and Isabella would live on the other. Julian, choosing to give Isabella her space, bought a smaller apartment nearby. Their lives became intricately, permanently entwined. The boys, Daniel and Mateo, would be raised as brothers. They would know the truth from the beginning in age-appropriate ways. They would have 4 parents who loved them. Weekends were spent together, holidays were a shared, chaotic affair. David taught Julian how to throw a baseball. Isabella and Maria bonded over their shared, unique journey of motherhood, finding solace and understanding in each other that no one else could provide. The marriage between Julian and Isabella was over. The trust had been shattered in a way that could never be fully repaired. But the anger had dissolved, replaced by a deep, complex, and respectful partnership. Julian's love for Mateo, they all agreed to keep the names the boys had been given, was no longer conditional on a DNA report. He was there for every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every milestone. He learned that fatherhood wasn't about genetics. It was about showing up. He also developed a tender uncle-like relationship with Daniel, his biological son, marveling at the tiny reflection of himself while respecting David's role as his father. The world saw a bizarre modern arrangement. But within the walls of their Brooklyn duplex, a fragile, beautiful ecosystem of love was thriving. It wasn't the life any of them had planned. It was messy, complicated, and often difficult. But it was real. Julian's vast fortune, which had once been the source of his paranoia about legacy and lineage, was now used to secure the future of 2 boys. The lawsuit against the Genesis Center resulted in a landmark settlement that not only provided for both families, but also led to sweeping reforms in the fertility industry nationwide. Brenda, the embryologist, faced criminal charges and lost her license, a tragic figure in a drama she had single-handedly created. One crisp autumn afternoon, About a year later, the four parents were at a local park. David was pushing Matteo on the swings, his laughter echoing in the air. Julian was on a bench with Isabella, watching Maria teach Daniel how to walk, his chubby legs wobbling with determination. "Do you ever think about the life we were supposed to have?" Isabella asked quietly, not with regret, but with a gentle curiosity. Julian watched his biological son take a triumphant step into Maria's arms. Then he looked at Matteo, the boy he had once rejected, soaring toward the sky on the swing. "The life we were supposed to have was based on a flawed algorithm," he said. "It was based on the idea that everything could be controlled, predicted. That love followed lines of code. This," he gestured to the beautiful, chaotic scene before them. "This is better. This is real." He hadn't found the simple truth he had been looking for, but he had found a better one. Family wasn't about data or DNA. It was about the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of love loss and the incredible unexpected grace of second chances. 5 years later, the rhythm of their life had settled into a steady, unconventional beat. The duplex in Park Slope was no longer a radical experiment, but simply home. The lawns were worn down by the ceaseless energy of 2 6-year-old boys, and the fence between the properties had long since been replaced by a wide, welcoming gate. Matteo and Daniel were in the same first-grade class, a fact that had initially raised eyebrows at the school, but was now accepted much like the presence of 4 parents at every school event. They were inseparable, a whirlwind of shared secrets and scraped knees fiercely protective of each other. Daniel had Julian's sharp, analytical eyes and David's steady demeanor. Matteo had Maria's artistic flair and Isabella's passionate heart. The challenge they were discovering came not from within their carefully constructed world, but from the outside. It arrived in the form of a parent-teacher conference with a young, well-meaning teacher named Miss Albright. The 4 of them, Isabella, Julian, Maria, and David, sat on child-sized chairs, a familiar, slightly comical sight. "They are wonderful boys." Miss Albright began smiling warmly. "Bright kind, and Daniel is a natural leader, while Matteo is so wonderfully creative, and their bond is just remarkable. But a question came up during our Families Week that I wanted to discuss with you all." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We were making family trees." Daniel drew a large oak tree with 4 main branches. When another student asked why he had 2 mums and 2 dads, Daniel just said, "Because my brother and I share." It was beautiful, but I sense the deeper questions are starting to form. After the conference, they gathered at their usual spot, a small cafe around the corner. The air between them was comfortable, forged through years of shared bedtimes, fevers, and birthday parties. "I knew the family tree project would be a landmine," David said, stirring his coffee. He was the rock, the one who always seemed to know the right simple thing to say. "But because we share, that's a good kid." Maria looked at Isabella, a silent communication passing between them that only they could understand. It was a look that acknowledged the phantom pain that sometimes surfaced on quiet nights, the ghost of a different life. "I worry about the day. Because we share isn't enough," Isabella confessed, her voice soft. "The day someone is cruel about it. Kids can be." It was Julian who responded, and his words surprised them all. "And we'll teach them that cruelty comes from ignorance. We'll teach them that our family isn't fragile. It's the opposite. It was built by choice. It was designed." He looked around the table. "Most families happen by default. Ours was a conscious decision, made by 4 people who chose love over anger and connection over biology. That makes it stronger, not weaker. The cold, data-driven CEO was gone, replaced by a man who had learned a different kind of logic. The logic of the heart. He was still a billionaire, still a force in the tech world, but his priorities had been fundamentally rewritten. His greatest project was no longer his company. It was this complex, sprawling, beautiful family. Later that evening, the truth of his words was put to the test. Isabella was tucking Matteo into bed. Mommy Matteo asked, his dark eyes serious. "Am I from your tummy?" Isabella's heart clenched, but she met his gaze without flinching. This was the moment they had all prepared for. "You grew in my tummy, sweetheart," she said, stroking his hair. "I carried you and kept you safe, and I was the very first person to hold you. And Mama Maria, her heart wanted you so much. She's your mum, too. You're the luckiest boy in the world." At the exact same time, in the apartment below, Daniel asked David a similar question. "Dad, why do I look like Uncle Julian?" David sat on the edge of the bed and pulled his son into a hug. "Well, buddy, the recipe to make you used a little bit from Uncle Julian and a little bit from Mum Isabella. But the ones who get to be your dad and Mum raising you and loving you every day, that's me and Mama. Maria. We won the lottery with you." It was their shared narrative. Simple, honest, and anchored in love. Later, from his apartment across the street, Julian stood at his window, a familiar ritual. He looked at the duplex, a warm beacon of light in the Brooklyn night. He could see the silhouettes moving inside, 2 families intertwined. He was no longer the lonely king in a glass castle. He was a vital part of a thriving, messy human ecosystem. He had lost a wife and a life he thought he wanted, but he had gained 2 sons and a definition of family more robust and meaningful than any algorithm could have ever predicted. The truth hadn't set him free in the way he'd expected. Instead, it had bound him to these people, to this life, in the most profound and unexpected way imaginable. And for the first time in his life, Julian Croft felt truly, completely rich. The incredible story of Julian Isabella and the Garcia family is a harrowing reminder that truth is often stranger and far more complex than fiction. They were thrust into an impossible situation, forced to confront the very definition of what it means to be a parent. What defines a family? Is it the blood that runs through our veins, or the unconditional love poured into a child day after day? Their journey didn't end with a simple answer or a neat resolution, but with the creation of something new, messy and profoundly beautiful. A family bound not by convention, but by an unbreakable shared love for 2 little boys. They chose love over law and connection, over biology, teaching us all that the human heart's capacity for love is the most powerful force of all. If this story of heartbreak mystery and the complex modern definition of family moved you, please honor their journey by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who appreciates a gripping, real-life drama, and be sure to subscribe for more unforgettable stories that challenge our understanding of the world.